We are foster parents, and we have been foster parents for 3 or 4 years. I'm not good at math, so I just kind of state numbers, but and we have had about 10 placements in that time. And I guess I was just going to kind of share some of our kids' testimonies and kind of things that we've encountered and dealt with, and kind of what God has shown us and what He has done for our children. We kind of, why we wanted to kind of adopt, per se, or go into foster care. We weren't really originally thinking foster care. We're just always had a heart for adoption, period. Just because when we met in college, we had just kind of said that's how we wanted to grow our family, and we never really wanted to have a whole bunch of biological children and then stop and have adopted children. We kind of wanted everybody to be mingled and all the ages to be intermixed, and we just thought that would be important to the kids to make them feel like they weren't just like second thought of. I think our heart for adoption comes from the gospel and biblical viewpoint of what God views adoption as, and that we are all adopted into His kingdom. And we were looking at a few key verses where He talks about adoption in the Bible. And it says Ephesians 1:5-6, He predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ, in accordance with His pleasure and will, to the praise of His glorious grace that He has freely given us to the one He loves. And James 1:27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So even though we didn't necessarily, like, I know some people start in adoption because of infertility or whatever, we had no idea what the future held. We just knew we wanted adoption to be part of that at some point so that we could kind of feel like we were being the hands and feet of Christ and doing what was kind of running after what His heart breaks for, you know. And so we got married, we moved to Texas, and he ran the residence halls, like the dorms, and so we lived on the floor of the dorms for quite a few years. So I didn't think we could get approved for a home study when you live with college students, so so we didn't really dive in yet, and we got pregnant with Emery. This is Emery. I just took these off my wall because I'm a really visual person, and I like to see pictures of people's families, and I realized we don't really have a good big picture, and I wanted to steal my husband's iPad because he has all pictures on his iPad, but then he had to go to work. So I took these off my wall, but this is Emery, and he's 7 now. And we got pregnant with him first when we were in Texas. And then we got pregnant with Israel. This is Israel now. Sorry, there's he's 5 now. Or as he says, if somebody asks him, he says, I'm a whole hand. That's Israel. When we were pregnant with Israel, we moved back to Iowa then, and because we knew we wanted to get back. We just kind of wanted to get away and have a fun, knowing we were going to be in Iowa the rest of our lives. Experience something different for a few years. So, but we came back with Israel, had him here, and then after he was about 1, Josh moved jobs at UNI, so we were able to get a house. And right when we got a house, then we knew we were kind of in the position where we could start venturing out and be like, okay, what do we want to do? And I think at first we had talked about foster care, but as a lot of you have probably experienced somebody in your life say something kind of negative about it, or how it'll ruin your kids, or you don't want to get too attached, or there are kids that are just going to start your house on fire, or, you know, there's a million things people say about it, so you're not usually like, yeah, let's do foster care first. And we really didn't know anybody that did foster care. We had no friends that were foster parents. We had nobody to ask questions to. You just remember those scary people in high school where you're like, I'd never go over to their house. And that's really all you knew about foster parents, per se. And so we started out in private adoption, thinking that's where God was, well, not thinking, but knowing God was leading us there. And we went through with a private agency out of Florida, and we got matched with a little boy who's 6 months. And we kind of did the truck of the paperwork and everything, and then it got time to, we got a call and said it was time to go pick him up. And so they were having a big court hearing, and after the court hearing they were going to move the rights over to us and we could bring him home. And we needed to raise like $12,000 though in that time before we went, and we totally knew that God was propelling this forward because we had raised $12,000 in like 7 days, and the money just came in like crazy, and we had so much support. And we went down to Florida and packed up Emory and Israel and went into court, and Mom was there and Dad was there because they were both in prison, and attorneys were there and the judge, and it was a big to-do, but the only people that didn't show up was our adoption agency. And when we got a hold of them finally, they just said, we don't really want anything to do with this case anymore. It's causing us too much money, and we're out. So wow. We walked away completely empty-handed and had to go back home, and he went into foster care after that court hearing. And so part of it after that was me lamenting days after days of, you know, wondering where he was, you know, who was taking care of him. Oh, I'm crying already. And knowing that, you know, there are not so great foster parents out there, and, you know, when he's crying, is he getting picked up? And I think that's how God, I think with Florida, a lot of people think, oh, do you regret doing it? Do you regret going? And I don't regret any of it. I think that was God's whole plan to get us through that, because what looked like doors were closing were actually God just preparing us. And you can look back now and just see, like, you know, had we not gone through a lot of that, I don't think we would be emotionally prepared or ready to face, you know, what we were about to face. And I think God was really showing us a lot of his characteristics that we could lean on later, and a lot of his attributes that we could hold firm on later. And knowing that he never left us the whole time. I mean, there's so many crazy things he did on that trip, of providing food and a flat tire and just things out of nowhere. And so I don't regret going, but I'm really thankful for that in our lives, of going through that. But when we got home, it was just constantly thinking, well, if we were foster parents, could we, you know, we could ensure that whatever kid came in our home, it would, you know, we would know that we'd be able, that they would get picked up every night, and they would, you know, be held, and they would feel no different. And but yet we still were really scared about foster care, just because we had nobody to ask questions to. And I think I was just kind of emotionally depleted after coming back from Florida, because I didn't want, private adoption can kind of come across sometimes, not that it's a bad thing, God can use any avenue to bring any kid home, but private adoption can get discouraging because you feel like you're ordering a baby, you feel like you're filling out like blonde hair, blue-eyed, you know, checklist kind of feeling, and there's a lot of money involved, and there's a lot of transaction feeling, and I didn't, when I came back empty-handed, I didn't want to feel like I was saying to God, I'm so mad because I wanted a baby, you know, like just baby hungry or something. I more so was just frustrated because I just wanted to be his hands and feet, and we wanted to be used and abused and used for however he wanted us to do that, and we kind of felt like we really weren't used, you know, we were kind of just placed in positions, and we came home and we didn't do anything, you know. So, you know, when Josh went to go get pizza one night, I came back home, or I was at home, and I kind of was just outside. I just turned the radio on in the car, like, really loud, and just, like, got in the grass, and I just started, like, almost screaming, you know, like, almost just kind of venting frustration or feeling of, I know I followed your arrows, and where do you want me to go next? Because I don't see the next arrow. I don't know where we're supposed to do. You know, I said, Lord, you know, I will come home empty-handed every single time. I just want to feel like I'm being used. And just as clear as day, I could just hear his voice. And he just said, Diana, I need you to become foster parents. And at that point, I was just like, I'll do whatever. I don't care. Like, I'm like, awesome. Okay, thank you. And so I ran inside, and I was kind of scared what Josh would say. And I was just like, he came home with the pizza, and I was just like, God wants us to be foster parents. And he's just like, okay. And I was like, oh, that was really easy. So I knew, like, okay, God had obviously softened his heart too, and we were on the right track. And so we signed up for classes, and I think there's 13 weeks of classes you take, and it went right really fast, actually. And we had somebody watching the kids, and then basically you sit by your phone basically after you get licensed, and you wait for that first call, you know, where they just call you out of the blue. It could be in the middle of the night, it could be in the morning, it could be any time. And our first call was actually our 2 daughters that we adopted, is Irie and Joy. And here they are. This is Joy. This is Irie. And they are, everybody always asks, are they real sisters? They are biological sisters. But at the time when you got the call, Joy was 2 months old, and Irie was 18 months old. And when they call you, they said, you know, we have 2 girls here at DHS that need to be picked up. One of them has 23 broken bones, and the other one's just severely malnourished, and she had bite marks all over her face and arms, and neither one had been fed or held or bathed or anything. Even though that's a heartbreaking thing to hear, we were more excited at the same time. And so it's like this huge adrenaline rush you can't really describe when you get a call like that. And we just grabbed everything and ran out the door, and you go to DHS and you basically walk up the steps and they just place them in your arms, and you're like, it's just a crazy feeling, overwhelming feeling, because they give you 5 minutes of what they know, which is usually not much. And they're like, oh yeah, don't go to this place, because that's where bio parents work. And then you leave, and you're like, oh, okay. I've never bottle fed a kid in my life because I exclusively breastfed. So we're like in Target with these 2 kids, like, what bottle do we get? I'm like calling my friends, like, that next, it usually typically if a child's under age 3 in foster care, it doesn't matter what parents do to the child, they all get the same amount of treatment. So everybody thinks, oh, they shouldn't have gotten visits, they shouldn't have got a whole right to a whole court system and whatnot. But it doesn't matter. They all get the same, how do I want to say, the same plan of action in the system, which is about 2 years from start to finish. If you're over 3, it's a lot longer than that. But that 2 years of our life was probably the hardest things I have ever experienced and gone through and heard. And that's why I think a lot of Florida had helped us to prepare us to that point. They were kind of like, oh, here's the hardest case in the whole county, and we're like, it's our first one. And we didn't know what we were doing, but I think that was a good thing, because I think a lot of people would have given up, and there was times where you wanted to give up just because it was so emotionally heart-wrenching. But there is nothing in the entire world that when you look at those 2 girls that from the moment you see them, you know, your womb knows no difference. You don't think these girls weren't born to me. Your heart knows no difference either, you know. And your kids don't even know any different. They think everybody came out of my belly. They don't even know which ones were adopted. But Joy was a miracle because she had both her femurs broken, both tibias, fibulas, her humerus, and all of her ribs 3 times. And she's an amazing miracle because at a baby that young, you know, like if you were to shake the core of a child or squeeze or hit or slam or throw against the wall, their head is so attached to the rest of their body that she should have had brain damage. And the child abuse investigator at Iowa City, you know, said that she had never seen such an extensive amount of abuse, and that actually when they did scans on her brain and everything, they couldn't find anything. Her brain was perfect. She didn't have any hematomas in her eyes. She, by that point when they found her, she had no medical help, and her bones started fusing back together. And God had just set her bones perfectly in place, and to this day, She has no issues or problems related to it. Like when you see the x-rays, they're all, you can see all the scar tissue and these golf ball sized things over each fracture, but they all perfectly fused right back in the exact same spot they were supposed to. I think, you know, she's totally should be dead. Totally should be dead. I mean, there's a million things that the child abuse investigator said on the stand that should have happened, and, you know, you hear on the news of a kid that gets 3 arm bones broken and they're dead the next day. She should not be alive, but she is, and she knows that. We tell her that every day, that she's a miracle. And that was a hard, teaching them how to, like Irie at that point, she was about 2, and reteaching her how to eat. She would hoard food when she'd see it. I mean, she's stuffing in like 2 bananas from ear to ear in her mouth, and she wouldn't chew them like a chipmunk. She'd just be like, I'm not going to eat again, and having to reteach her how to eat, and a lot of stuff like that. But they were just, that's why I love to show pictures of them, because a lot of people think when I become foster parents, they kind of have this evilized thought of what kids are, and they're just normal kids. They're just kids that want loved, and it was literally on the way home from picking them up at DHS. We put them in the car, and we were like 2 minutes away from home, and all of a sudden Irie in the back goes, Mommy? And I was like, I looked at Josh, and I'm like, it's like all of a sudden that moment where you're like, wow, like she looks at me like I'm to take care of her, and that's a big responsibility, and I'm her mom. And, you know, she was so desperately wanting to call somebody Mommy, and that's a really heartbreaking, heart-wrenching feeling to feel. But anyways, during that time, their biological parents were very, 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 very difficult people to get along with. They kind of wanted to make everybody's lives as hard as possible, and they fought a really, really, really hard fight, and it was the first time where I felt like Satan was just like literally on your shoulder, and it's like it had to stay there until it was all over. And how do you fight that physical, daily, draining battle of feeling like you're getting knocked down and having to pull yourself back up? And I guess I wanted to share with you some of the things we learned through their case. I put, Satan never wastes a fiery dart by aiming at a spot covered by armor. The bullseye is located dead center in our inconsistencies. And so we felt like every morning we had to figure out, where was our inconsistency line? What were we not covering with armor? What were we not prepared for? Because every time we weren't prepared, Satan would come across and just hit us across the head, and we'd go down through the mud, and we'd get back up, and it was just so emotionally heart-wrenching to go through that. And I knew that I couldn't spend every day crying in the corner of my kitchen while my kids are like running around screaming, and like, this just doesn't work. This doesn't work. And I got, you know, you got to find a way to be sane and cope. So the one defensive weapon God has given us is the armor of God, and the only offensive weapon He has given us is the Word of God. And so I was going through Beth Moore's Bible studies at that point, and I was kind of hanging on her every word. And I would just start posting scriptures around the house, and in front of the toilet, and by the refrigerator, and on top of light switches, and every time, because Satan can't hear what you're saying in your mind, but when you speak it, then he can hear it. And just speaking those out loud, like whether they were scriptures or whether they were just truths or attributes of God that I was going to claim, speaking those out loud every single day did a multitude of a difference to attack Satan, because you don't think about how the enemy wants to devour you every single morning when you wake up, and you need to regularly be wounding him with the Word of God. And let's see, there's 3 different scenarios when people face a fiery trial. Scenario A is you are delivered from the fire, and our faith is built. When you're delivered from the fire, an example would be like you go into the doctor and they find something sketchy. This is, you know, life or death kind of thing. And you come back, and then they're like, oh, never mind, I guess there's nothing there. That's when God builds your faith, because He delivers you straight from the fire. You don't really have time. You don't really go through the fire. You kind of, there was more there, and maybe you had cancer, and God totally took it away, but you don't see it. You didn't go through the trial. You didn't experience it. So sometimes God uses those, but He can't use, and everybody always wants to always be continually delivered from the fire right away, because going through a trial really sucks. And but we had to take heart in that it's not always good for God to just do those scenarios right away in everybody's lives, because it's so easy for us to, when he delivers us from the fire, it's so easy for us as human beings to say, to not blame the reason for what happened on God. All of a sudden you start convincing yourself, maybe it was the ultrasound machine that wasn't doing its job right. Maybe it was what I ate that morning. Maybe it was, and you start saying the reason why you were healed or something didn't happen was because of something else, and you don't point your finger at God. And ultimately, God wants everything in our lives to be pointed at Him. That's the only reason we get up in the morning. That's the only reason we fall asleep at night, is for everything to be pointed at Him in our lives. And so through this time, you find joy in the trials of scenario B, where you're delivered through the fire, and that there are actually really good reasons why God takes you through a trial and puts you through a lot of not fun crap, because at the end your faith is refined when you're delivered through a fire. And at the end of going through a fire, you have no other explanation of how you got through that other than God. And your mouth will continually never cease telling of His praises and what He did for you and your child's lives, because there's no other explanation other than it was God that did it. And so I think that's a good, encouraging thing when you are going through a trial, that God's trying to refine your faith to show you that, hey, look, you know, I'm going to get you through this, but you're going to know at the end of the day that if anybody asks you, you're going to continually speak of my praises. And that's a big reason why I really wanted to come here when they asked to speak, because it's just like, I don't get a lot of opportunities since I have so many kids, and, you know, you're really busy, but I just, I don't want to ever stop trying to I don't ever feel like I can remotely express what my eyes have seen and what God has done. And I still don't even feel like my words show it at all or say it, but if I can try to point everything that I've seen and everything that my kids have been through to God, then maybe I've done something. Then scenario C would be you're delivered by the fire, which would be people that would be delivered straight into His arms that would die, and their faith would be perfected because they'd be in heaven. 1 Peter 1:6-7 says, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." When you are delivered through the fire, I like to think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When they went through the fire, it says in the Bible that they were completely untouched. The fire did not touch a single part of their body, but there was one thing that did burn off, and it was the ropes that were binding their hands together. The ropes were burned off when they came out, and God allows us to go through a fire to free us from a long-standing bondage, so that when we come out, we are free from those chains. And I like to correlate the gospel and adoption and foster care with kind of that picture of ropes burning off, that a lot of the kids in foster care are very vulnerable. They don't have a voice. They can't speak up for themselves. They need Christians to get into foster care, people who are willing to go through the fire for them, because it's a really tough battle to fight for them, so that when they go through and you go through for them, that their ropes are burned off and their chains are set free. Because I always tell people, I have not really felt or seen anything in this world where God takes literally somebody's life from A to B other than through foster care. Because, you know, when I look at my children, Irie and Joy, and, you know, knowing that they were sexually abused and beaten and everything else, that I know that God had literally taken them from that and plucked them, and when they put them in our home, He turned their whole generational sin, their whole chains were broken. I mean, you can physically see somebody that was bound to be a drug addict, a terrible father, a terrible mother, and God just completely changed that from here to here. And I can't think of any example than in foster care where God physically does that huge of a leap in somebody's life. Because what they were meant to become and what the devil meant to destroy in their life for the rest of their life, he doesn't ever have a hold of anymore. And he doesn't have a say over them anymore. And I think that's huge. And there's so many kids out there that need somebody to do that for them because they can't do it on their own. When God, let's see, 1 Peter 4:1. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. And then we learn through that to have joy through the trials. It's kind of a weird thing to find joy when you're really like angry and upset and you don't feel good. But you start finding joy because, like, when the devil starts attacking you, you start thinking, hey, something really good's going to happen. And that's when you start kind of almost laughing about it instead of getting depressed by it, because there'd always be something when it went really wrong meant that the devil was fighting even harder, because he knew that when we showed up to court, the lawyer was going to say this. And, you know, you could physically see the spiritual battle in front of your eyes of the devil just knowing he had a grip on their hearts and knowing that if their rights were terminated, he lost that. And he wants to fight as hard as he possibly can for those kids because he's got them already in their grip. I mean, he doesn't have to do anything in foster care. They're already in their grip. And you're the one fighting, trying to get them out of his grip. And so he's going to fight a really hard fight for them. And not every case, like, I don't mean this to come across as scary. Their case specifically was very, very, very unique and different. Everybody told us there's not a case in the world like their case. So they're not all that so extreme and so crazy, and the biological parents aren't that evil. But it was what we got. So it says, I put, take heart and be encouraged. I said, he wants to make demons tremble over you. Every time you're in a tight fist of fear, remember you're in something much tighter. Isaiah 49:16. I see I have engraved you in the palm of my hand, it says. And I used to think that God had literally, I envisioned God taking a pen and writing my name on the palm of his hand. But actually I've come to more visualize it as that we are engraved in his hand because he holds us so incredibly tight. And he never lets go of us, and he never leaves us, ever, even when we're at the rock bottom and feel like we're going to die. Everyone thinks that the only way to draw people to Christ is by doing something. You know, I remember going through a few years in my life, maybe before I had a whole bunch of kids, I had time to think, and I thought, oh, I'm not going out on the streets or on a college campus, and I'm not just telling people the gospel and saying, this Jesus died for your sins, and yelling it at the rooftops, and you're just not a good Christian if you don't do that, you know. I just like to encourage you that a lot of, after learning through all this, that a majority of your faith and what reflection of Christ you will be your life, your family, the decisions you choose to make, how you build your, what you and your family do as a mission, as a statement, how people view you on Facebook. You know, that counts. Everybody thinks Facebook's just stupid, but I think Facebook's great. You know, it's an awesome opportunity to be a reflection of Christ in your life just by posting a picture, you know, just by saying an encouraging word. That really does count. It's not like God just thinks social media is crap, you know. I liked when I found this. It says, when because of your faith, your life too becomes perceptibly different. When your reactions are quite opposite to what the situation seems to call for, and your activities can no longer be exclaimed in terms of your personality, that is when your neighborhood will sit up and take notice. In the eyes of the world, it is not our relationship with Jesus that counts. It is our resemblance to him. And let's see. If you have received Christ, nothing touches you without touching his eye. Nothing bites you without feeling it. He sees it, he knows it, he acts it, and best of all, he heals. And that's been a lot of the things that we saw through the girls' case and we took from it. And to kind of wrap that up real quick, their rights were terminated, obviously. And last October, I think, I don't know, I'm really bad at time, we adopted them and they became forever part of our family. So that was probably the best day in the whole life. Well, adoption day was great, but actually I think deliverance day is better. I call deliverance day the day that visits stop, because visits are probably like the hardest thing ever on the kids, and the system tries to act like it's really good for them, but it's nothing but bad that comes from them. But they have to go through them, and even my kids would be like, why do they have to see them if they beat them? You know, like, that doesn't make sense to a kid, you know? And I'm like, the judge requires it, and God requires it of us, and we're going to do it, and we're going to get through this, and someday we will be done with this. So we just do what we got to do it was what's required to save them. So basically, a day before they were adopted, I was like all thinking, you think you're like totally stripped of control in your life, and you're like, God, I've given it to you all. But I was like laying out all our dresses, and we had to be there like at 7 in the morning. You know, with like 6 kids that are under the age of 4, you're like, that's going to be really bad. And so I was like, I'm going to get them to bed at like 5 o'clock in the at night, and we're all going to like eat really early, and I'm going to shave my legs, and like I'm going to paint my nails actually, and it's going to be a good day. And all of a sudden God's like, no, I got way better plans. And we get this call on that night before the girls' court date, and it was for Elijah, our look at little one. It's Elijah. Oh. He now is 19 months, and we got the call for him. And what's great about his call was that when you adopt from foster care, they put you on hold kind of in their computer to not call you for like 3 or 4 months, because they kind of want you to get used to your new child, even though at that point you've had them 2 years. But they put you on hold so you can't get any calls. And God knew that, gosh, I have like 6 hours, and in 6 hours they're going to not be able to take him. And so God knew that, and what's so great is that had we not gotten the call 6 hours later, we wouldn't have been able to pick him up, because we would have been in the system as not able to get him. And they told us on the phone when we called that we could pick him up from the hospital right away. But actually, when we got there, they're like, I don't know who told you that. He has to stay in the hospital because he's losing a lot of weight, and so you can take him home in quite a few days. But I'm like, when you zoom back on the bigger picture, you're like, God just kind of like snatched that opportunity real quick to kind of give you that call, because he wasn't supposed to go home that day, and he wasn't supposed to be with us, and it's just great to see God orchestrate all of that, knowing that he was meant to be with us, which feels so great to feel like when, you know, foster care, they can call anybody really. But Elijah was, he was 9 days old when we came to the hospital. And he was born addicted to meth and marijuana and prescription drugs and a whole bunch of other stuff. And they just kind of said, oh, there's this little boy, but he's got something wrong with his foot, and that's really about it. That's kind of like all you get. But we've never really said no to a phone call, so I don't really care. I'm just like, awesome! Like, we just jumped in the car, and I was like, screw the adoption day, we'll just go, and, you know, whatever, we'll all look like a hot mess in the morning, but that's what happens. So we picked Josh up from work and dropped all the kids off at Grandma and Grandpa's, and me and Josh went to the hospital, and the social worker meets you at the front door, and they take you upstairs, and me and Josh walk in his room, and he's just this perfect little baby that's just, you know, it's heart-wrenching because you don't think about on a daily basis that there's babies just sitting in the hospital completely utterly alone. You don't think that goes on. You don't think that exists. You think somebody's there loving on them. But it's a really harsh reality when, you know, the nurse said, I'll give you a couple minutes with him, and we'll come back. You know, we're going to have a nurse meeting or whatever. And at that moment, it's like the whole world of his responsibility is on your shoulders. And I think at that moment, we just started praying over him, because we weren't sure what sort of bondage he was in, what his case was going to entail. We didn't have a lot of details at that point, but we just knew that he was utterly alone. And, you know, I felt terrible for him. You kind of, every time you get a call for a kid, you go through a grieving process, and you grieve for them, and it's hits you rock hard that, like, here's this perfect baby who is not wanted by majority of the world, and not shown, not held, not picked up. He hadn't had his bath yet. He had nobody to put clothes on him. Just, we kind of just took like a half hour and just prayed over him and said, you know, little one, I know that your circumstances seem like nobody cares about you, that nobody loves you, and that you are totally insignificant and unimportant, but I swear to you that the angels sang the day you were born, and I swear to you that you are so utterly perfect. And I just wanted him to know that so bad, because nobody was there telling him that. And that, I feel like, is my biggest argument when people say they can't do foster care, is when I was holding him that night, we had to leave like at midnight because we had to get to the courthouse. But I just said to God, I said, I have no idea if I'm going to have this child for a month, 6 months, or just one day. I don't know if they're going to walk in that room and say, oh, never mind, we found somebody else to take care of him. But in that moment, when he's looking at to you just to feed me, to clothe me, bathe me, do something for me, I just said to God, I said, I don't care if I am asked to show up and rock him for 24 hours and leave and never see him the rest of my life. I will do that over and over again for the rest of my life, and I will walk away, because it is such a humbling experience to be asked by God to do that for a child that nobody will do that for. And it really brings up Matthew 25:35-36 is what I feel like foster care really is for when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. And then when I was in prison, you came to visit me. Foster care is all of that, even the prison part. You learn more about the court system and probation and all these things that you never thought all these things your parents put you in a bubble to protect you from. And we ended up taking him home, and every month we got with him, we had no idea what was going to happen, but I just thank you, Lord, for one more month, because that's one more month I wasn't supposed to have. And basically, Elisha has a lot of struggles. He also has fetal alcohol effects, which a lot of people think the drugs are more harsh on a baby, but it's actually alcohol is one of the biggest things that change a child's development and brain and everything than anything else. And as he started getting older, we started noticing a lot of differences in him, and started noticing he wasn't eating, and then he wasn't crawling, and then he wasn't talking, and so they diagnosed him with fetal alcohol effects, and he has a lot of breathing issues. I swear we're in the ER every night because he was just going to stop breathing. Parents would smoke around him at visits every time, and he basically just stopped breathing because we found out he has tracheomalacia and bronchiomalacia, which is where his trachea collapses every single time he breathes. He's on medications for that. He was born with clubfoot, which is the thing they said his foot looked funny. His foot was brought up to his knee, looked like somebody just broke his foot, and it was just turned all the way up. And so we went through, we went to Iowa City every 5 to 7 days to get a new cast on his foot. So he went through about 7 to 10 castings on his foot, and then he has Achilles tendon severed, and now he has braces on his feet that he wears until he's 5 to keep his foot from not going back. And he's been diagnosed with PTSD and mental retardation and everything else under the sun. But I swear that kid is the best thing that has ever happened to us, and he is such a joy. And every time we see him, every time we take a picture, it's just God, I love that kid. He is the best thing ever. And after a while, I'm just Lord, no, yes, totally. I could not think of ever living without him. And we get to adopt him in about another month and a half, so pretty soon. And his rights are already severed, and his parents are both either in prison or jail. And I'm really excited for that day because it'll be really fun. But basically, we got Elijah in September, and then at Christmas, I kind of stumbled upon organizing in a weird way. our social workers, I started seeing needs from them where they, there's a lot of needs in foster care that there's no place to just drop donations off to. And so I just kind of started just on Facebook correlating like bibs and toys and things like that. And then the social workers start having kids write out just like wish list kind of thing, like top needs, top wants kind of things. And I just would put out a thing on Facebook like, oh, does anybody want to adopt a list, you know, of a kid? And they could go, you have the opportunity to go drop it off at their house. You can meet them. I mean, it's pretty low-key because we kind of just did whatever we wanted to do. And there was a list that my social worker kept trying to get, and she said, I have this girl, Jada. She's in a shelter. She doesn't have any parents. She's kind of on her own. You know, I'm trying to get you that list. And it was like, I kept asking for the list, and it was like 5-6 days before Christmas, and I hadn't got it yet. And I'm like, what about this Jada girl? And she's like, I'll get it to you in a little bit. And then she didn't get it to us, and I felt like I couldn't ask anybody on Facebook to take her list because it was just too close to Christmas, and I didn't want to bother anybody with that. So I said, you know what, how about I just pick her up, take her out shopping. All I knew was her name was Jada, she's 16, and she needs stuff. So I'm like, I'll just take her shopping. Josh is like, you should just have a girls' day. And I'm like, so I just went to the shelter in Independence, having no idea what I was walking into. I just was thinking I was going to take her shopping. And we got there, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to meet you. I'm so glad you're young. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, well, what number am I in the family? And I'm like, thinking every kid wants to feel like they belong, you know. I'm like, oh, you're number 6. And then she, like, got down, and she gets in the huge car, and she's like, this car's way bigger than I imagined. And I'm like, what were you imagining? I don't know. And then she pulls out this paper from her pocket, and she's like, okay, me and my friends at the shelter and staff have helped me acquire these questions to ask you, and I just need to ask you these serious questions. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, what kind of foods do you make at home? And I'm like, you know, I just started naming it. She's like, you don't make salad every day, do you? And I'm like, no. And she's like, can I have a cell phone at your house? And I was like, what am I supposed to say? What's happening here? Like, what's going on? And she's like, do you have a curfew? What do you expect of me? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh no, she like thinks I'm taking her home. Like, and we weren't licensed for teenagers. We didn't even have the capacity in our home to take another child because we already had a lot of placements. We were out of whatever licensed limit. I never even thought we would ever take a teenager until our kids were teenagers. Like, we just thought that's like 20 years down the road. And, but yet, like, she's looking to me like she wants me to take her home. I didn't know she was in foster care. I'm just like, we will figure out what we should do for you, and I'll talk to your social worker, and I swear we'll find you a home. And I just feel like the biggest knife stab in your heart. You're like, what do I do? And what do I do with this? And I'm like, okay, just ignore it. Let's have a fun day. We got her, you know, some underwear, a bra, coat, like all these things she didn't have, and got her some fun stuff like, you know, fingernail polish, and she had so much fun. And it just, throughout the day, I just realized she was so sheltered in a way. I mean, she had no idea what Cold Stone was. She'd never been to Applebee's. She had never ridden on a roller coaster before in her life. She just, it was like as if you're talking to a 2-year-old, you know what I mean? Like, just no life experiences. I had not eaten, tasted, seen the world, period. And having to explain to her simple things is, I mean, even to this day, is kind of funny. I went to go drop her back off at the shelter, and everybody at the shelter thought I was taking her home. And when I went up there, they were like, oh, you have the best foster mom ever. And she's like, no, guys, I'm not going with her. And they're like, why, you don't want her? And I'm like, please get me out of here. Like, oh, this is terrible. It was the worst situation ever to be in. And when I left, she's like, oh, well, I'll just at least take your number so I can call you. And I was like, that'd be great. And maybe we can go out to eat or something, because she hadn't left. That was the first time she'd left the shelter in 50 days, because they just take them upstairs to work on their GED. Nobody takes them to public school. And they don't take them out to eat or field trips or anything like that. So I got back in the van, and the whole drive home, I just bawled. Like, I just bawled. I was, like, not mad at God, but it was more like this, Lord, you knew I was going to walk into that. You knew I was going to hear all that. You knew it. Oh, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, how do you walk away from that and think, oh, I'm not going to care about a child who is going to be spit out into the world and end up just like her parents who abandoned her and get arrested and go to jail and become a drug user and everything else, you know, that her life was going towards. And there was nobody there teaching her how to fill out a college application, how to even finish. Nobody wanted her to finish college, high school. They just wanted her to get her GED, which was going to get her nowhere. And it's just all these things like, what do I do with that? And for like 3 days, I was just numb. Like, I felt bad. Josh wanted to, like, talk to me all the time. And I'm like just like that, 24/7. And I said, one night I just sat down with Emery, our 7-year-old, because kids are really good at putting things black and white when ours is all fuzzy in our head. And I said, Emery, we just really need to pray about Jada. And he's like, well, what do we need to pray about? And I said, we just need to pray whether she should be a part of our family or not, because I don't really know. That's kind of scary, and I don't really know what God wants us to do. I don't really feel like he was just, like, audibly saying anything about it. And he goes, well, I don't know why we need to pray about that. And I was like, why? And he goes, well, God would want everybody to be a part of our family. And I was like, what do I say? What do you say back? Like, I had nothing to say back, so I knew if I had nothing to say back, I really didn't have an argument against it, even though I didn't feel prepared. I didn't feel like we could ever parent a teenager or had any sort of experience or anything. But Josh hadn't met him, and the kids hadn't met her, so we went to go meet her and hung out with her a couple nights and went out to eat, and she was awesome with the kids, and it just went so great. And we thought just one day we'd surprise her. God, like, literally, I'm like, God, I can't do this because we were not supposed to take her. He had all the paperwork come through all of a sudden the next day, and all these people were calling me like, oh, yeah, you can go pick her up. Yeah. We're like, oh, really? They, like, approved all these variances for us because we're not supposed to have another person in the house. And we surprised her because she was thinking at this point we're just friends, you know. And we wrote a letter to her, and we said, let's go out for pizza. And she came in the car, and all the kids actually were sleeping at that point, which was kind of nice. And she got in the car, and we just read this letter that we wrote for her back and forth. And we said, you know, we want you to know that we will fight for you, and we will never give up on you. And we really want you to be a part of our family. But we want this to be your choice, because her whole life has been her not having the decision. Everybody's told her what to do. And so I said, we want this to be your decision to come live with us and be a part of our family for the rest of your life, if that's what you want. And she just started bawling, and she's just like, yes, 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 yes. And she ran up and got her stuff. And this is Jada. We finalized her adoption just actually last week at the courthouse. She's 17. She's a senior. And she's in CNA class, so she's going to get her CNA pretty soon. And she was on the honor roll, and it is not easy. Teenagers, not easy. Like, oh, really hard. But, like when she said, you think little kids, like, that's where all of a sudden I get this moment where I'm like, wow, I am never taking little kids for granted. Like, I love little toddlers. Jada is not bad, but it is hard. Teenagers are hard. They can have their own say. They can say what they want. They can say, what's for dinner? And you're like, why are you asking me? But she really is a good kid. I mean, her biggest struggles are attitude problems, but she has come so far in decisions she makes for her life and what she wants her life to become, and she is so accepting of love. She never knew what unconditional love was like, and just to hear somebody say, I don't care what you do, I will never leave, is huge in a teenager's life to hear, because everything in their life has been conditional. Everything they did, they got beat, or everything they did, they got thrown out, and they have no conceptualization. The biggest way to show them Christ is to just show them unconditional love, because that's how they'll just automatically see Christ's face, because they'll all of a sudden feel this love that doesn't feel normal, that doesn't feel right, that doesn't feel like they deserve it. And basically, to wrap up, sorry, I'm going a little over. Adoption is a reflection of the gospel, because we are all adopted. We're all adopted into God's kingdom. We are all God's children. I say there is absolutely no difference between Jada, me, the girls, the boys. We are all the same. I don't think that, and also a lot of people get into foster care and they're like, oh, what if I don't get to keep that child? What if they go home? And really, when it comes down to it, my biological children are not my own either. I wake up every morning and I'm not guaranteed for them to stay in that house. I mean, they can be ripped away from me or something could happen at any moment. I'm not trying to be negative, but it's no different from a foster child who has the possibility of going home, that you come to this realization that none of my kids in my home, on my house are truly my own to covet, that God has given me my biological children too, just in a very different way. And they're just as much gifts, and they're just as much miracles, and He's writing their story just the same as He is my kids that are adopted. And the fear of losing and not knowing every single day is Elijah going to go home? Are they going to send him home? Am I going to lose him for the rest of my life? I really should be on edge like that every day with my kids, you know? It puts in a whole different perspective of that I shouldn't take any day for granted, because nobody says I'm guaranteed anything. And they're gifts which are given to me, and I don't deserve any of them. And so that's really what makes the whole process very easy, because there isn't a difference, and a lot of people want to make a difference, but there isn't. You know, they want love just like your other kids, and they want acceptance, and they want approval and help through life like any other kid. A lot of people say I can never do foster care because I would get too attached. And parents willing to get too attached is exactly what children need. A lot of people say that they just don't want to feel the pain. But we have all grown up to have very good coping skills and things necessary to go through pain. And then they have not been taught anything. I mean, the risk of what we're willing to risk for them to gain something is always worth it in the end. Even if it's 24 hours that you're expected just to pick up a child and walk away from them, that pain is nothing compared to the pain that they have been through, not even on a remote scale. I have never experienced anything that my kids have experienced. I've had a very cushy life. My parents aren't divorced. They're happily married. I didn't go through any sort of trial in my life. And anything that I could endure is nothing compared to what they have endured. I found, just a quick finish, I found this quick blog excerpt that I think is really cool. This lady wrote it. She said, "My husband and I don't have any special ability to be foster parents. Our hearts are breakable, and detachment is neither feasible nor desirable. Parents willing to get too attached are precisely what children in foster care need. By God's grace, we will survive the grief of giving up our foster son. Though the pain will be great, we will have the coping skills and resources to deal with the loss. But if he were to go without the love and attachment he needs at this point in his development, he couldn't simply catch up later in life. It's crucial for his sake that we risk the pain of getting too attached. Jesus says, 'Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it.' Matthew 10:39. We want to lose our lives for the sake of our foster child, not only because he needs us to, but because Christ met our even more desperate need. Every dirty diaper, every nighttime feeding, every heart-wrenching visit with his birth parents, and every court date, and every call from a social worker remind us that we're losing our lives. We are giving our hearts away to this little child we have no promise of keeping. Still, no matter the sacrifice we make, they pale in comparison to all that Christ sacrificed to save us." And that's how it ended. So thank you for having me.